So my name's Donna Lemon. I'm a local black woman, born and bred. My grandfather's country is Central Desert, middle of Australia, Alice Springs, Aranda woman. My grandmother is from Tennant Creek, so I'm also a Warramunga woman. My father's from New Zealand, so I have a little bit of, Pacific Island in me. So my mob are obviously Aranda and Warramunga, but I have family throughout the territory. I also have family around Australia. My big sister actually lives in Texas, USA. She's been there for over 22 years. We get to see her every now and then, but she's married to an African American man who has a lot of cultural significance as well in his community through what he does. So he, at the moment, for the past 15, 20 years, he's been working as a chief engineer with the National Ballooning Facility in Texas. So he goes around the world and lets off weather balloons, and I would imagine, because a lot of cultures have significance when it comes to the weather and things that they believe in predict the weather, I believe that there has been opportunity for consultation around that sort of stuff as a chief engineer of those sort of things. So I've lived in Alice Springs all my life. I'm 38 years of age. My mum sadly passed away 11 years ago. I don't have any communication with my dad. I have my older sister, as I said, lives in Texas, USA, Karen. I have an older brother named Ian who lives here with his little family. And I have a younger brother that I found out about only 10 years ago that had been adopted at birth. He's recently made contact with us in the past 12 months, and we've been introduced. He came home for a family reunion. Thank you to the Central Australian Stolen Generation that brought him home. His name is Carl. He lives on the Gold Coast. Being the baby of the family before I found out about Carl, when my mum told me that we had a younger brother, I was so dismissive. I didn't want to know. I was very hurt and upset that we hadn't had a chance to grow up with him. I felt betrayed that she could do such a thing. I was quite young and naive when I had found out about him, because of the fact that there were circumstances surrounding her pregnancy at the time. She was a young mother with 3 children already. There's 7 years difference between Karen, 5 years difference between Ian and myself. So a young mother without any, spouse support back in, the 70s, early 80s, as late as the 60s, when my sister was born. I had no choice but, to accept the fact that things happened in her life that she had no control over. She had no support. She lived under a roof with her parents, Nan and Pop Braun, who at the time had 9 children. So they were raising their own families, and some of my mum and my mum's sisters and brothers had children that were also being raised in the old railway houses in Alice Springs, which were the first houses built in Alice Springs. My grandfather worked on the railways and was trying to provide for such a big family. My mum felt that because she had 3 children at such a young age, she couldn't possibly raise another without feeling like she couldn't give us everything that she wanted to give us. It was very hard back in those days when there was no money around. Aboriginal people have always been self-sustainable before, government policy and stuff came into play and money got thrown at us for different programs. We were always self-sustainable. Communities were economically viable on their own. Hunters and gatherers and homemakers, we had all of that sort of stuff. My little brother being put up for adoption wasn't something that my mother did. She did so with a really heavy heart, and I know this because she cried for him time after time after time every night, and I didn't understand why. Had she kept him at birth, it would have meant that it would have been very hard. It was hard on us when we were children. You know, our dinner and our breakfast and our lunches included or consisted of Vegemite and butter on Weet Bix, bread and butter with tomato sauce. You know, when my mum had the means to buy the bare necessities to make us a big stew, she could make a meal out of nothing. One onion, one piece of meat, one potato, one carrot, and that would go for days with just the bare necessities that we had in our house. But it was very hard. Carl was born. Had my mum not wanted him, he wouldn't be here. She needed him to be in this world. There was a reason why she actually had him. I've got goosebumps all over my legs. It's really funny. And this is a conversation that I had with him when I first met him. I was the one that made the contact with him. My brother and sister were a little bit apprehensive about it. Once I'd come to that special place where I believed in my heart, well, this makes me a big sister. I'm no longer the baby. I'm a big sister. I was born between my brothers, which makes me feel really special that I'm cocooned in so much love and affection, and they've got my back type thing. It was a really special time for me. So I made contact with him. He made contact with us. I took one look at him and I just knew in my heart that he was our blood. He looks like our mum. He talks like our mum. He's so placid like her, very soft-spoken. Had it not been for the Central Australian Stolen Generation in Alice Springs, that communication would never have happened. They bent over backwards for us. They put the money behind the reunion. They brought Carl home. They provided the means for us to be able to get out to our homelands, which is 75 kilometres north of Alice Springs. Our homeland is called Alcupicha, and I've actually got an Alcupicha Pride rugby league shirt on that my brothers and I organised a rugby team last year for the Rugby Nines. So we've represented our home team, but our country is called Alcupicha. Its our other name is called Gillimbor. It was land that was handed down through our grandfather, Tommy, and family actually reside on the homelands and grow their fruit and their vegetables, and it's very rich in the red soil, and it's a place where family go and be together, because that is who we are. That's who makes us who we are. Blood runs through country, and you know the country runs through us. It's what's been given to us by our ancestors. It's what's been there before us. It's there for us now, and it's going to be there for generations to come. It's something that is ours. We own it. We belong to it, and the country belongs to us. But it's also a spiritual connection, I think, to country when you have so many ancestors that have gone before us, but that have paved the way for us to have a brighter future by doing things that are sustainable out there. You know, growing your own fruit and vegetables and living off the land, going back to the way things were hundreds and hundreds of years ago, before, you know, we had technology and stuff. We actually took our little brother back to Gillimbor last year for a big family reunion. Best time. He didn't know he was Aboriginal. He'd been fostered by a family from Alice that the father was a pilot, so he got around a fair bit as a pilot and moved his family around. And when I spoke to Carl for the first time, one of the first things I said to him is, "Do you have any idea who you are?" And he said, "Well, no." And I said, "You're an Aboriginal man from Alice Springs, born into one of the biggest local Aboriginal families that there are. I mean, the Braun family is a very prominent name in this town, simply because our grandfather and grandmother worked very hard to raise a family of 9. 2 of their children, my Auntie Josie and my Auntie Maxine, had 9 kids respectively, each as well. So, and then you've got the extended families throughout the territory. But country is what bonds us. Women are the nurturers. We are born into country to be homemakers and to maintain things around the home, and you know, make sure our kids are cared for, nurture our kids from birth. One of the things that I was really looking forward to doing when I fell pregnant with my eldest son was breastfeeding, simply because that was the way I was taught by grandmothers to make our kids strong and healthy. And I think the connection to country for a woman is as fair as it is for a man when you have women's places and men's places, sites of significance that are only for one, for the men or the women. Our country that I come from, Gillenbore, is family. So there are so many sites of significance around Central Australia, especially in the desert, where you have men's places and women's places, and they're separate. We can't talk about men's places and men can't talk about women's places, nor can we visit them. They are sites of significance, and we need to adhere to cultural law. And I believe that's why some visitors to the Central Desert area sometimes may be given the wrong information. When they come to visit, they are taken to sites of significance that may not be appropriate for visiting, and therefore it's imperative to check with local traditional owners that that's okay for tour companies to venture into places that they may not be familiar with. Our country, which is called Alcupicha, it is not predominantly owned by male or female culture. It's family orientated. It's a place for family to go and be together. We do, however, around our area at Gillenbore, and it's a very big landmass as well. We also own part of the block on the other side of the North Stewart Highway. So we have the mainland on the right-hand side, just after the Plenty Highway, heading to Darwin. And then we own some of the country on the other side of the highway, which is not occupied. It doesn't have water and things like that. It hasn't been inhabited yet by family. But there are sites around Gillenbore, Alcupicha, where our men will go and sit and women can't follow, and where our women can go and sit and our men can't follow. We go out there, we go honey anting, we go look for, bush tucker. We have actually a pet out there. He's a huge printy, goanna. He's huge, and he comes and sits on my auntie's veranda and my uncle's veranda, and he sits there and soaks up the sun, and family know, don't touch him. He's not for eating. This goanna is a friend, not food. You need to have a balance. You need to live between the worlds. You need to give your bush time to the bush, like you need to spend time out bush with family, get back to those roots of the way things used to be. I know plenty of traditional women who still go out and hunt, and they gut the kangaroo and take all the kangaroo's insides out, waiting to get being prepared for supper. I know plenty of women that involve all the children in that process, and then you have to be able to shift between your cultural obligations out bush and come into town and learn how to be, depending on what you do in your job, be a conservative person and be able to speak at the level that government require you to speak at, so that you can have input and a conversation around the issues that are happening on your homeland. So you need to be able to work between the two worlds and adapt when you need to adapt, because it's one thing to go and sit with a group of women under a tree in a creek bed and talk about the issues that they're facing with things that may be happening with those future generations, their children. But you also need to be able to talk to our community members who belong to our town camps, our women in our town camps, to see what are the issues. How can we as a community help? Where does our community kids and our town camp kids fit when they come to town? There are a lot of our young people who aren't equipped to deal with mainstream society. They come into town, they've not been, guided the right way in terms of how to behave in town. So we have a couple of, kids from bush and communities that are a little bit wayward and do the wrong thing, and therefore it paints a picture that all our kids are the same. And our women are very strong when it comes to defending our children and making sure that our children are spoken for, but also the consequences that come with the actions that our children choose to take, whether it be throwing a rock at a car on a highway, whether it be breaking into a house and stealing stuff, whether it be stealing a vehicle and trashing it around town. Our mothers need to have a little bit more say and be able to discipline their children the way my mum used to discipline me, with that heavy-handed approach. there was nothing. When I was growing up, if I stepped out of line, I got a hiding. Simple. If I back-chatted, if I disrespected my mum, I got a hiding. Nowadays, because of government policy, we are unable to smack our children. We are not allowed to discipline our children by law, which has led to a generation of disrespectful young people. I believe it was either the generation after me or the generation after that. So we're talking probably the mid-80s, the early 90s, where there was a generation born with a lack of respect because our parents lost control, our mothers lost control. They lost the right to discipline their children. It's one thing to discipline, but it's another to flog your child continuously. There's a difference. And I think what our government did was they took the right away for us to be mothers. My mother was always the discipliner in my family. She was the only one who raised me. But if I stepped out of line, I wasn't allowed to say what. If I went, if I shrugged my shoulders, and if I did I would cop it. She'd just have to give me a look and I knew I was in trouble. The ability to be able to discipline our children has been taken away from us, and I think that was one of the biggest biggest issues that led to the way our children are today, with a lack of respect, especially towards our mothers. They gave us life. We need to respect our mothers. First and foremost, they brought us into this world. We need to be treated as the closest things to God. We gave life. I think back in the olden days, as I said, families they lived on the bare necessities. Nowadays you have technology, you have money being thrown at you by government, and they're not to fix things. They're to have these band-aid effects on families that they think is working. They don't spend the time with the families to really sit down and absorb what's needed. It's okay to sit on your black cushy chairs and make all these decisions about our community people, and especially our women. We are mothers first and foremost, yet it's not even seen as an occupation, and it's the hardest job in the world. Family back in the olden days was very strong because you had the community cultural responsibilities. You still have those today, but you also have the external influences like alcohol and drugs and antisocial behaviour and lack of government direction and accountability. Absolutely. My mum was a number one inspiration in my life. She received her Associate Diploma in Aboriginal Studies. She did her Associate Diploma in Aboriginal Health. She was an Aboriginal health worker qualified. She was an educator, and I'd always shadow her when she was going to IAD, the Institute for Aboriginal Development, and doing all her studies in Bachelor College. And she taught me that education is key. Do you have education, there's nothing you can't do. So I started my journey quite young. I did a Associate Diploma in dance at the Redfern Dance Theatre as a fresh-faced 16-year-old, never been to the city in my life. I left my family and the security of a small home and went and studied a bit of dance, lived at Coogee Bay, which is in Sydney. We lived at a nunnery, and that was quite scary. There were lots of stories around the history of the nunnery. Studied dance for a little while, felt like the city life was just too much for a bush girl from Alice Springs, Northern Territory, in the middle of nowhere, to all these loud development sites around the city, to lots of cars, lots of traffic. And I came home. I got quite scared being in the city, and there was so much peer pressure to be a part of the group that I was studying with. It was too much. So I came home, and then I started my first job at Congress Childcare. Congress is the Central Australian Aboriginal Congress. It's the primary healthcare provider for Aboriginal people in Central Australia. We have auspice sites within a 100-kilometre radius of Alice Springs. So we've gone out to communities and helped them to set up their own health centres, and then we look after those health centres in conjunction with the communities. It empowers Aboriginal people to look after their health, to for the life expectancy of Aboriginal people. I started my first job at Congress Childcare. I then went across as the PA to the director at the time. I then had a go at working with the Karma shops, selling artefacts at the Alice Springs Airport shop with another fellow by the name of Gary Kennellan and my cousin Joe Shields. We were all out there working at the time. I then went from Karma to an organisation called the Central Australian Family Resource Centre, who looked after 640,000 square kilometres of Central Australia, dealing predominantly with women's rights and women's issues. I think at the time we had 3-4 troop carriers that did an area of 640,000 square kilometres. We then incorporated to become the Walcha Chutanku Palyapai, and that stands for Doing Good Work for Families. I believe that the name of that organisation came about from a competition. And forgive me, I'm not sure where the winner came from, but it means doing good work for families. The board of Walcha is all women. So we have lots of strong women from all around Central Australia, the Central Desert area, and I believe from in the Pitlands as well, governing the organisation. I then went from Walcha to, where did I go from there? Wow, back in my memory bank. But I worked at Desert Knowledge Australia. I worked at the Central Land Council. Desert Knowledge Australia is an organisation that supports bush networks and things that happen out in the bush. So it's setting up outback business networks to make sure that bush communities have communication with other communities. They look at sustainable enterprises and economic development opportunities. I was there in the capacity as the Indigenous Education Employment Task Force Program Coordinator. So I did things like making What's Your Dream campaigns for our young people to aspire to having dreams and hope that it doesn't matter where you come from when you're young. If you have aspirations to become a pilot, there's nothing in this world that can stop you from becoming a pilot. You just have to apply yourself and be a little bit disciplined and have that dedication and commitment to wanting to achieve that. I don't think it's changed a lot. I think there are a lot of our traditional women that still refuse to use mobile phones. I think it would be far more beneficial for them to jump in a troopie and come into town and have a face-to-face meeting, and for representatives from organisations to travel to communities and have those same meetings. I don't think communication is good when you need to ring and check on somebody, but when you need real consultation about community development and things that are happening in communities, you need to have that on the ground grassroots approach, and that can only be achieved face to face, sitting in a creek bed under a tree, having that yarn around a billy can of tea on a fire. Oh look, it's the best thing since sliced bread. I think there's not enough education out there for our young people to be smart. Our program is called the Congress Community Health Education Program. It's made up of two components. We have the Young Males Community Health Education Package, and we have the Young Women's Community Health Education Package. We deliver to young females and young males between 10 young females and males between 10 and 20 years of age in our local schools around Alice Springs, but we also service community. We teach them about holistic sexual health education. We have 8 units in the female package and 9 units in the male package, and it's from everything from puberty, STIs, safe sex, sex and the law, contraception, fatherhood, body care, relationships. So we have manuals that we take into our schools, and we educate our children in a way, our young people in a way that better informs them of their choices, tells them about the law. In the Northern Territory, you are not permitted to have sex under the age of 16, and this is law. Every state and territory in Australia is different, but the territory is 16. It is so important for us to educate our young people in this, because, especially women, the reason why our hips expand when we're going through puberty is to prepare us for pregnancy and prepare us for the birth of our children. So it's important that we educate our young people that when you hit puberty, these are some of the things that you go through, and this is why you go through these things. Some of our young women believe that if you have bigger breasts than someone else, that makes a difference to breastfeeding. It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't matter how big or small your breasts are. They have the same function. I can't reiterate to our students enough, neither can our female educator, Nat, that breastfeeding is the only way that our children can build up an immunity to sickness when they're babies. Breast milk is the most important thing. Cloth nappies are the most important thing. I have 2 sons. My sons were born in 2000 and 2003. I breastfed my eldest, Javan, until he was 3 because he had a touch of meningitis, and I wanted him to be the strongest child that I could have. And breast milk was what I was taught was the best thing for your baby. I breastfed both my children, dressed them in cloth nappies until they got too fat to wear them. And through the units that we deliver to especially our young women in particular, because they will grow up to bear children, they will grow up to become grandparents. They need to know that if they don't use protection during sexual intercourse at a young age, they may end up with a sexually transmitted infection that could harm the chances of conceiving a child. It's so important, and we try not to sugarcoat when we go in and deliver our training, because if we sugarcoat the beginnings of our young people coming through life, we're actually setting them up to fail in their future. We need to be honest about how to look after your body, how to take care of yourself from a health and well-being point of view. With our young women, what's acceptable in terms of healthy relationships. There are good and there are bad relationships. Domestic violence is one that we always reinforce. It's not to be accepted. There is help out there. We use complementary DVDs to complement our packages. There may be an audience out there that have heard about the Angela Barker story. Angela Barker was a 16-year-old who was in quite a really bad position with a domestic violence relationship, and her boyfriend at the time beat her within an inch of her life. She's now in a wheelchair, and she goes to schools across the United States, and she promotes anti-domestic violence projects with our young people, because that's very prominent in our communities as well. And our women, they find it hard to talk up about it because it's either shame job or they're afraid of the repercussions if it gets, like Chinese whispers and it gets back to the partner. Our women are scared that it may affect their children as well. They choose to, I believe, a lot of our women choose to stay because they really don't believe there's a way out for them. I'm a mother of 2 teenage sons, and I think that if I had been in a domestic violence relationship, I believe that my sons would have saw that kind of behaviour. And the thing that our women do is they continually forgive the man or their partner, and the children see this as a cycle. So it tends to be a cycle that repeats itself, and their children then become men who believe that it's okay and acceptable to hit women. So we teach our young girls that that's not the way. That's not the way. I think my legacy is, don't ever let anyone tell you can't do something. The speed bumps that have put in front of me in my 38 years of existence have merely been put there to slow me down. They're never going to stop me from achieving the things I want to achieve. I had dreams when I was younger to work in childcare. I've done that. I had dreams when I was younger to have children. I've done that. I'm raising them to be respectable young men. I have dreams when I was younger to make a difference. Every day I do that, because Alice Springs, in the middle of the central desert of Australia, is such a small knit community that I see myself as a role model to a lot of our young people, especially our young girls. I think that they're the ones that need a bit of nurturing, because there is a lot of guidance that they've missed out on, I believe, through the stolen generation, because their grandmothers were taken away and they weren't given opportunities to be educated and learn their family's way. But also because I'm a woman, and I think it's important for us women to stick together and be strong for each other, because if we're not, well, who's going to be? My legacy is my children. I need to make sure that the future is safe for them, and that the platform that I'm trying to pave for them is one of being successful, but being fair and respectable and honest, and work for the things you want, to be helpful all the time, appreciative of what you have. Respect, I can't say that word enough. We need to have respect. We need to acknowledge the past, we need to appreciate the present, and we need to respect the future.